Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. We're going to take a look at how customers can maximize Business Central with Copilot. We've had a lot of customers asking for more information around Copilot, and it's a hot topic, and we're excited to dive in today. Everything available through Microsoft enhancements and also Power BI reporting with more reports available. As a quick introduction today, I'm Samantha Dallaire here with Center Technologies. I work with sales and helping customers with Business Central and Dynamics related applications. And joining me today is Steve Anderson, our solution architect for Business Central.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Great to be here. Excited to talk about this topic. So I think, are we ready to get rolling? Do we have enough people in?
We're ready to get started.
Let's do
As
it.
a quick overview, we'll be covering Copilot with Business Central and also all of the new Power BI reports available with Dynamics 365.
So let's go. So we're going to jump right into Copilot for Business Central, and let's just talk about some of the topics we're going to cover here. So there's some elements in Copilot today, and we're going to talk about half of them. There's some that we're not going to discuss yet that are going to come in the future, but we're going to talk about chatting, or what some people might call plain language queries, like let's ask Copilot within the context of Business Central, what we can do with it, what we can learn, what we can do with data. There's data analysis, which means look at some data, like let's look at a list of GL entries or customer ledger entries and group those, analyze those, see what we can do with them. There are pivot tables, and this is really slick to be able to give you what looks like pivot tables in Excel, but you don't have to get to Excel. You can do that in Business Central. And then Bank Correct. They've added some Copilot to Bank Correct, which is, I would say, the very first step towards what we're going to see is a lot more automation of accounting processes happening in Business Central. And Bank Recon is kind of their first step into that of what process could we automate that could save us some time, especially on large bank recs. But we're going to see this in the future more too. And then there'll be there's other features if you're ever doing some research or looking. There are some other things that we won't cover here that I put at the bottom of the page. But it's each version that comes out, they're growing and adding to the capabilities of Copilot. So this slide talks about, this is from within Business Central. This talks about what can Copilot do. So for those of you that are on Business Central, you could search for this and you would see it. But I want to bring this up again just to show it's got a list of what we can do, but there's also links, and there's questions always about, okay, well, what does this really mean about Copilot being in Business Central? Is it the same Copilot that I use when I go out onto the web, or I'm to my browser and I ask Copilot questions? And the answer is yes and no. It is the same type of engine, but the difference here is that Copilot for Business Central stays within Business Central. It's not looking at data at the rest of your organization. It's not a deployment of Copilot, say, that can see your SharePoint files or that can see your file shares or your other data. It's strictly inside Business Central. So from the perspective of security, and we know that having proper security is a prerequisite to deploying Copilot in general for companies. And so that's a lot of thought needs to go into that. But what they've done here, which makes it a little bit easier to get started, is Copilot lives within the context of Business Central, meaning security that you already have in place in Business Central, and users that are working in Business Central, they're the only ones that can use that. So it's not like you have to worry about the broader aspect of this. And again, if I go ask questions, and I'll show you here in just a second live, if I ask questions in the Copilot chat from BC, it's not looking out into other parts of my business that are in Microsoft. At some point, those will intermingle with the proper security, but this is all within the context of what can I do inside Business Central. Okay, so I'm going to show just a couple examples, and then I'll switch over to the real thing. So this is just showing. This is talking about chat. Like, what kind of things can I ask Business Central about? So I can tell it to find some information for me. I can ask it to explain how to do something. I can look for documentation. So there's a number of different areas that it's going to do. And you see here I have an example of looking for invoices, or and the one on the right hand side says show customers grouped by their location. So there's logic and things that are happening on our data that we can do with the chat. So I'm going to flip over to the real thing. Here we go. So here's
Steve,
my business. Yes.
does Copilot look at any data outside of Business Central?
Today, the way that in the context of what we're doing right here, the only place that it looks outside of would be like looking at Microsoft Help on Business Central or other links like that. But it's not looking at your company's data outside of Business Central. The data is only inside Business Central. The anything else would be looking at like learn.microsoft.com for information about how to use Business Central. Okay,
Okay.
so great. So there's a little button here that's for Copilot. Looks like the little Copilot symbol. So I showed this in the screenshot. You've got the different ways you can look things up, and we'll go through a couple of those. One of the important things, and we're all learning this about Copilot just in general, is you get better results when you learn how to prompt it properly. Ask more specific questions. It's a little different in the world of Business Central because we're looking at numbers and data, and of course it can do that to a degree, but also again it depends on how you prompt it. So if I'm looking at the find information here, or I'm looking at explain, you see there's prompts here like help me understand the process, or ask what can Copilot do on this page. So it's just information about what you can do and what you can't do. Let me tab back over on one of these, and then we'll run one for real. So yeah, I've got one here about, let's do this with our items and our coffee beans. So my demo environment has a little coffee business running. And so let me switch over to that again. So I'm going to ask it about what items with beans do we have? Now that's kind of maybe a little bit vague in saying with beans, what does with beans mean? But we're going to see what Copilot can do. Obviously, it's going to start looking for our item list. And what it's doing actually is looking at descriptions, looking at item categories, looking at different data in here, and it found a result. So this is like I said, I didn't ask it about item numbers. I didn't even tell it which field to look at. I just said items with beans. So that might be a little more broad, but it did find something. So you can see it listed out some items. It gave me some information that could be helpful. I could click on one of these and open up the item card and see this is telling me I've got like this one I have 50 on hand. It's got a price. It also gave me a list page. So let me go into the list page here. And this is going to help us segue into some of their other topics and things that we can do with the pivot tables and other areas like that. But you can see it went directly to a list. It did one thing for me again because this is how it's more than just usually you're in Copilot and I'm in there all day looking up error messages or doing research and things like that, just in Copilot in general. And you get your answers, but that's kind of it. Here, I got an answer. It took me to a page in Business Central, and it filtered for me. So you see, it automatically applied the filter of anything with beans, and so it basically understood or figured out on its own that when I said beans, it probably should be looking for the description. So it did that for me automatically. So that's kind of a slick example. And of course, this is going to depend on how creative are we at what we ask, and we know a little bit about our data, but even then if I didn't know much about the data, I could just ask about these and I've got that query. So from here I can move into other areas, of course, but that's just kind of an example of it's looking at my data, it's trying to give me what it thinks is the best answer based on my query, and it kind of takes it from there. So that's something you can do with the chats. The other thing that's with the chats, and I'm going to pull up an item card, and I just want to talk about is a different use of kind of the chat, but also what Copilot does, how it interacts with the help. So all of the fields, if I don't know, if I'm, we got our basic search. We always have that, right? Or search with the help, the short little help. But I can ask Copilot about the type field. Again, in this case, Copilot's it's looking internally at Business Central documentation. It might just pull this from the Business Central server side, or it might go out and it might go to the web, right? So it's looking at different information that's telling you something about these fields. So there's a lot of places where you can interact and ask about that, either from help or how-tos or getting real data.
Steve,
Okay,
what is the difference between Copilot and Business Central Help?
So it's really that Copilot is pulling from the Business Central help, and it's pulling from the learn.microsoft.com. So it's really the same thing. It's just how the Copilot goes and grabs it. So Copilot's not going to create its own help content. It's going to go ahead and say, hey, I see that there's help information inside BC, and I see that there's help from Microsoft about BC on the web. That's its source. So it'll try to give you its own wording of it a little bit, but usually what we find is give me a little bit of explanation and then give me a lot of references. And that's what you'll find here too. Okay, let's move on. I talked about a couple of those. Let's get into the data analysis. And I won't spend too long on the screen, but this gets to do with looking at data and then building your own list and then letting Copilot analyze it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and we'll do an example here with the customer ledger like I've done. Oops. There we go. Let me go back to the customer ledger. I have a shortcut for that. So what happens here on the list page, there's an option here, like this is a list of everything that's happened with the customer, invoices, payments, et cetera, credit memos, whatever happened. But I can go in and I can do and analyze the list. So analyzing the list, you can ask it information. Again, there's little prompts here about, what should it guides you through what's the best way to ask for things. I'm going to keep this simple. And what I'm going to say is I just want to see customer posting date. I want to see amount. Let's just go with that. Let's start real simple. So I'm just listing out some field names basically and hitting generate to get a simple list. Give it a second here. I could have put some additional qualifiers on it. But you can see it kind of started building a list, right? And it threw a few more fields on there because it probably thinks I probably want those. So the first thing that you notice here is, okay, I still have my prompt here, but it's built a different view of the list, and it also turned on the pivot table mode. So we're kind of talking about a couple things here at once. So this pivot mode, we're not in a pivot summary yet. We've got our list fields, and I'll show you in a minute how we can drag and drop fields on there like you would normally do in a pivot table. But what it's done so far is, again, I put in a little bit of info, and it said, here's the list. Now I can take this list and I can still do grouping. So like, for example, I can group by name. And so now I've got I'm analyzing the data, and I can kind of take it from here and be able to say, okay, what are the invoices for this customer, for the other customer? I can drill down if I want to, but it's starting to show me some data here. I'm going to ungroup those. And you can do multiple levels of grouping. Again, it kind of looks like a pivot table. But I can go a little bit further. I mean, I've got this information. Let's say I want to see things that are only in March of 24. You see there's some posting dates at the top. So I'm going to say posting date greater than 02 28, or so it was 29, wasn't it that year? 24. And see what it does. So I'm basically saying this is really a refinement. So it's looking at the data, and it gave me, yep, I've got some stuff in 25, but you don't see any dates before my filter. So I'm just kind of filtering on the fly, right? So if I like this is kind of a way to build a query, to build a list. of course. To keep it means now I've got a list, and anytime I come to this page, I don't have to go through this whole process again. I can just come back in and I'll show you. Let's say I'm on my home page. Go back to my customer ledger entries. That analysis is out there. It's running the query. It's out there for me to work with. Taking a second to pull the data together, but it's a way to save queries as you build them, so that you don't have to recreate this process each time. I don't know why that one's taking a little longer to run. We'll come back to that. Oh, there it goes. It finally changed the name. It's interesting. It didn't show the name right here. Okay, but that's some way you can analyze the data. Let me stop that one, and I'm going to switch the view again. We'll go back to the next topic. So let me show you. Go back over here. So we did some grouping and things. Let's talk about the pivot tables. So you can have Copilot build a pivot for you. So you can see here, I've got a prompt that says pivot on customer name, then document type, which is something we can do. You can use Copilot to do that, but Copilot kind of also works automatically with these ledger screens, these list screens. And I can actually go in on this page and I can hit there's a button here that just, it's still, Copilot's still involved, but it's basically taking this list. Here's the one that we worked with earlier, and I've got the pivot mode. So again, think of this like an alternative to you going in and exporting this to Excel and creating your own pivot tables. I know most of you accountants are still going to do that. That's great. We're all going to keep loving it Excel. But if you want to do some of that here in the page and you don't want to spit it out yet, we can do this where we're using the pivots. You see there's some values in the sum, but I can hit the pivot mode. It automatically does the totaling. Or if I do the grouping, it will group these. Like if I drag the customer name down here on my groups, kind of the same thing I just did a second ago, right? So I did the groups, and let's drag the document date on here, drag these in, right? And so inside it, there's going to be a grouping by date. So this isn't necessarily anything that's magic, but it is a way to keep your pivot table concepts in BC, and I don't have, and I can go to Excel when I'm ready. So I don't want to go there yet, but it just, I can go there when I'm ready. Otherwise, I can stay inside BC. The one reason you might want to do this and stay in BC is I have links here, right? So I'm looking at an invoice. It's part of my analysis. I click on that. I actually can see where this came from. There's a ledger entry. I want to drill down. Maybe I want to understand, where did this come from? Okay, I see this is an invoice, and I can go back and just keep drilling. So I'll drill here for a second. It's going to find the GL entries, the invoice itself. So let's just go straight to the invoice. So here I have the invoice, right? And so I've started with a pivot table, but I've drilled back to the invoice. So that's one reason you might want to do this inside BC, and until you're ready, you don't need to export to Excel. And when you are ready, you can have the export button here. You can open these up in Excel. Okay, so let's get back over to our list here. So again, that's just kind of going into the automated view of the pivot. So the next one is going to be the bank rec. So this is the one where I talked about they're moving in the direction of accounting automation, and so there's a lot of movement in ERP to make some of the routine or some of the mundane processes faster, add automation where it makes sense. But you're going to see here, I'll show you some automation of the bank rec, but also keeping control over what gets posted and when it gets closed, and all that still stays in the accounting control. But it will save us some time, especially on large bank reconciliations. So you see there's a reconcile button here with a little Copilot symbol. So we're going to get over to that. Okay, so let me go into my bank rec. Got one here. I started this out already, and I'm going to open this up. There's different ways to approach this. I'm going to hide a little bit of this.
Hey, Steve, we have a quick question.
Yes.
Rodrigo is asking, would Business Central be able to connect to existing ERP systems in a business in order to pull data in real time for analysis with Copilot?
So Business Central could be made to integrate with things like a billing system, or if you have different businesses that have an ERP system and you want them to work together, it could. But Business Central is its own ERP solution. It's its own accounting, operations, inventory. They could be made to talk, but it's not. Its purpose is not necessarily to pull that data over. Um, so we might need to talk more about what's the use case here. But what we're seeing here is sort of a self-contained. I'm running all my business inside Business Central. We do have customers though that say, "Well, I've got this billing system that does all my billing, and then I bring that data over to BC." That, of course, is very doable. Or I've got a special maintenance system that's tracking equipment, and I need that to come over to BC. In that context, as long as the data comes in, it's available to work with. So just know it's a full-fledged, a full ERP solution, but it can integrate with other pieces. Okay, good question. So we're going to talk about the bank recon hero. You see the button here. I started that topic is, and this is everyone has a little bit different approach to this. This is a very simple example, but I want to show the automation and just talk about what I think are best practices. So I am a former accountant, and back in the days when I did bank recs, you try to always stay on top of your bank recs, and ideally, especially with online banking, you could come in here almost every day, and at least every week, but you don't have to wait to the end of the month to do your bank rec. You can do these daily as you go. Business Central has online banking. So there's a link. You can create a link between Business Central and your bank accounts. It's a secure link, so it gets your updated activity, it gets your balances. You can use it to send ACH or positive pay. In this context here, it could be used to import the activity from the bank. So I get a bank statement side of things for my recon on the left, and this right-hand side is activity that's coming from other modules. So it's typically things like accounts receivable posting deposits and cash receipts, and payables posting invoice or payments. And if you did any transfers or other special things, they would show on the right. You could have the system come in and import the bank. You see there's a connect to banks. You can also, if you have a bank, some banks, they're not as friendly with the importing maybe as others. You can still manually go out and import a bank file that you may have scraped or downloaded from the bank. And so I've already done that here just to simplify our example, but just know that you can automatically import these and keep it up to date, or you can go out and grab a file or grab data, import it in. And again, because in my example or in my best practice, I like to kind of do this as I go. I already have a couple of things. The ones that are in bold green here, I don't know if it shows as green, but the ones that look a little more bold, these are, I'm just pretending that, I've already done the recon for the 16th, and now I'm moving on to the next dates. And I'm just going to jump all the way to the end of the month here for this example. But again, I recommend you do these as frequently as you can and keep them updated. Each time you go through that, then you've imported the data from the bank, you can hit this reconcile button. And so in this case, it's telling me that, hey, it's going to override things because I already did some matches. But generally what it's doing is it's looking at the data in the bank statement, it's looking at the data in BC, and it's saying, what can we match up? And so it's using some intelligence, like obviously it's checking dates and descriptions and amounts, and anything that's in the data, it's trying to say, do these look like they belong together? That even goes as far as to say, on this one that you see, okay, it did 7 of 11. It's got one Copilot match. I think the other ones probably lined up better because they already were simple enough. So where this really gets helpful is if there's a slightly different description on maybe a check or something else that went through, or if it was a wire or something else, it might need a little bit more help from Copilot. So there's some kind of built-in matching, and then his Copilot kind of takes it to the next level on, let's try to match things. But you get some occasional ones here like this one where it says, well, I found an amount, and it says, okay, let's see, this is actually two different things. So it found those and said, it looks like this one deposit is two different payments inside Business Central that already, took place. So it's going to do that for us, and it's going to say, yeah, okay, that's good. Let's go ahead and match those up. So I'm going to say keep it, which all this means is mark the ones that we think have a match. And so you can see here, there's a few more in bold. It matched the service fee, which it saw over there. It matched up the checks. The checks are probably the easiest ones to match normally, except when I know sometimes the bank, at least in the old days, they might make a mistake on the character reading. Now they're much better with AI reading the documents, but sometimes they don't match up exactly. But not everything got matched. So let's talk about what didn't happen. So there's one here that didn't happen. And I'm not sure, exactly, okay, why didn't either Copilot or BC natively figure it out? There might be something slightly different, for some reason why it didn't match them up. So I can still manually do that. So the goal is, of course, as little as possible that I have to manually match these. But I can go in and say, okay, let's go ahead and knock this one out. Let's match these two up manually. Okay, so I'm going to say, go ahead and match these. That's just matching those two. Those are pretty simple. The other ones on here, I know these are not in Business Central yet because let's say that there was, the interest income. So I did 5 cents because, the bank loves to not pay you any interest. But so there's a little bit of money here that came in. We haven't recognized that yet. And let's say we did a wire outside. And so, ideally you would have recorded this first, right? But, I know there's scenarios where sometimes a wire gets done with the bank and then we got to record it after the fact. So that's the scenario I'm talking about here is I did a wire to pay my taxes, but I didn't book it in the system yet. Ideally, I would have done that. But this is a good way to say, okay, well, what are we going to do about these? So this is where Copilot comes in again. I'm going to select these two. And there's another process here that I like that says post difference to GL account. So what this is going to do, it's going to try to say, hey, what should we do with these two differences? It knows they're not booked in BC. So it's suggesting that I post a transaction and it's using the dates that were on the transaction date. It's suggesting that we put these into this GL account that's actually interest income, and the other one that is estimated income tax. And I didn't rig this. I mean, it really just looked at I just put the description in, and Copilot's looked at the chart, and it said, hey, I see in my chart of accounts, I see an account for interest income. I see an account for taxes. And so it's suggesting, and it's just a suggestion at this point, but it's suggesting that you go in and you post those two transactions that it found for you to those accounts. And there's other aspects, and there's other things we could do in here. We're not going to, there's a dimension concept, which is think of it like a department or something else. But just the most important part of this is it's trying to save me time because if I click keep it right here, it's going to automatically post these to those accounts for me. And that's going to get my bank rec in balance. So here's a kind of a decision point. Not everybody, not all accountants like the system just posting things for them like this. Now, if you're good with the GL accounts, in which normally you would say, yeah, okay, fine, it's going to the right GL accounts. But if you'd feel more comfortable going to a journal first and then posting, then you can do that. You don't have to it's just good to know that this might go where you want it to go. Another reason you might decide not to follow this through is you might have batch approval. You might say, my journal entries and other types of transactions in Business Central, they need to route through an approval process in the company before I let them post automatically. So it might be an accounting control or a business process reason why that I don't go through with this. So I'm gonna say discard so you can see the other option. There is an option here that says transfer to GL. And if I wanted to, I could say, okay, I'm going to drop this into a GL journal. It's going to create a journal for me. I'm not going to run it, but it would basically say, drop this into a journal entry, and then I can decide, do I need to review it? Do I need to print it? What do I want to do? So it gives you the control, right? You're still in control, but it certainly has helped you identify these and move them through. But again, I like to let the system do it for me. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll send this through to finish this out. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and say keep it. And it just went through a posting process. And it's posted, it's matched, everything's in green, everything's matched up. Really, I'm ready to go through and post the bank rec. So there's a lot more to this. It's not really I've gone pretty deep into bank rec. It's not a full bank rec demo, so I'm not going to show all the reports and outstanding and things. But the idea is if you have a large volume of activity, a large volume of checks, deposits, etc., this is going to save a lot of time in both the matching up and then if there are discrepancies, what to do to get those moved out, right? To get those posted without having to do it manually. So that's the idea there. So I'm going to pause here and we'll switch back here. Before I move, let me see, get to the last screen of this. Yeah, let's go right here for a second. Were there any questions that popped up? I'm going to move out of this topic. We're going to move away from Copilot into Power BI next. But were there any other Copilot questions that we want to address first?
Steve, is Copilot logging into your bank account?
Copilot is not logging in directly, but Business Central would log in only if you set up online banking in your bank account and it sets up a link. It's a secure login, so it actually prompts you in a screen. It's like it basically like opens up a page that would be the same if you went to online banking. So Copilot is not doing that itself. Copilot is not going outside and looking at your bank. Copilot can only use what's inside BC already. And so that means the files came in through our online banking. So it's not going outside of it's it's an important thing to know. It's not snooping outside of BC. It's not going out to your bank account or anywhere else. It's just using the data that's inside BC to make that connection.
Okay.
Great. All right. So last thing I want to talk about this is for a future webinar, but I want to mention, we've talked about the things that are there today inside Copilot in BC. There are other things. Obviously, Copilot is a big play outside of BC, and you see it everywhere in Microsoft. And we're going to talk about this in a future webinar, but there are ways to build what's called an agent. Think of it like a bot that says, I want to have some process or activity, feed it through Copilot and AI and get data into BC. And just again, this is just an introduction of what will happen in the future. But an example might be if I was doing either a customer or a vendor onboarding, you might have a chat bot inside Teams where if someone needs to onboard a new vendor, that me as an accountant or me as someone that has very limited access maybe to BC, I would get prompts in a chat in Teams. I would fill out the form. It would ask me logical questions that would take me through a process depending on what I'm looking for. It would logically feed that through Copilot and do some validation, and then you could actually create a vendor. So it would be a way of saying, we have our own process as a company that we set up where we have to ask these questions and we have to get this information. I need a tax ID number. I need, information for 1099, whatever it is. That can be done in a sort of an abbreviated, accelerated way where it feeds into BC. So there's a lot of that. That's kind of an idea of what's coming. But that example is to say it can be built for your company specifically. You can use Copilot and agents to do that. And then eventually Microsoft will add those on their own. But that's the future of what's coming. Okay, so let's talk about, this will be our next topic, the Power BI. So in the version of, there's the most recent kind of big release of Business Central, they added a lot of Power BI reports, a lot of dashboards and reports. And so you can see the list here of what they've done. And they're going to expand on this. Their goal is to basically take almost all of the reports and things you can run in BC, even the standard type reports like an aging report, and convert those. I would say not convert, but add to that a Power BI version of those. So we're not going to lose our old paginated reports or reports that are kind of lists that we can get to Excel or where we want to get them to. But we're going to have on top of that Power BI, which means we can have dashboards. We can have Power BI in a way where we can expand the data out to people that maybe don't even have Business Central if it's appropriate, and see it in a more consumable and obviously a better looking format when you go through Power BI. So they just kind of a initial release on this last version, they added, I think it's like 70 something different reports, and we're going to talk through some of those. So this is just a screenshot of some, but what I'm actually is just flip over to BC again, and I'm going to open up. You can see on my dashboard, I've got a kind of a snapshot picture of a financial overview. And this dashboard, of course, this homepage is all based on my security role and what I should see and what's going on with the company. So that's all going to be tailored to me. And there's, again, those reports, many of those reports are in here. I'm going to, just for purposes of kind of show this, I'm going to expand this. So they don't expect you to kind of see that in a small view. It's kind of like just a placeholder to say, yeah, I've got this report, what do I want to do with it? So you can go full screen on this, or you can, I'm going to expand this out a little bit more. So I know this is real small. I'll see if I actually can go full screen. But before I do that, you see there's tabs here. So each of the area, this is the financial area. They call it the finance app. There are different aspects. Here's some detailed data, like detail. We were over here just a few minutes ago in the customer ledger. There's GL entries, agings. Some of these are reports, and some of these are dashboards, right? So, but this is kind of the starting point. Let me go full screen because it's a little easier to see all this. Okay, so this is a live dashboard of data in here. So if I hover over these, or if I click on something, you can see it's moving around here. If I click on one of these, it's got all the data and it's changing. If I click on April 22, it changed data in the other aspects. It's just kind of showing it's live into this. They've built out their recommendation, right? So this is, this is a starting point. You've got just KPIs and different balances and things that might be financial oriented. You can still use filtering. So to the extent that any of you are doing any Power BI reports like this now, or even if it's the same concept, even if you did this on your own in Excel and you built in slicers in Excel where you could do filtering, same concept, right? So I see here in this list, I can see customers. So all of these are live, right? So this is just giving you all the different filters and data elements that I can work with that are available to go through these. So I'm just going to hit a couple of these on each area, just kind of to see,
Steve,
give
quick
you an idea.
question here.
Yes.
How do you add Power BI to your dashboard?
Right. So Power BI gets added to the dashboard. Let me back up a step. Let me get out of the full view. So there's a little bit of setup to be done. It's not bad. Let's talk about that a little bit though, because it is relevant and important. There's a process for, I'm going to do select report. You're going to see a list here. So this will take a second to come up. So there's going to be a prerequisite here. And the prerequisite is first that you go out and you download the apps from partner source or from app source. So, and actually we can put these in the deck because we're going to send this deck out. I can give you the shortcuts to this, but from Microsoft's, ecosystem of apps, they have available, we can just download these and deploy them to Power BI, and they automatically get connected to Business Central. The prerequisite to that is for people that are going to view these, they need some type of license that includes Power BI Pro. So it might be a Power BI Pro standalone that's like attached to your Microsoft 365 license, or it might be one of the levels of Microsoft 365 licensing that already includes that. But that's your prerequisite of being able to see these and use them does require a Power BI Pro license for each user. And they're fairly inexpensive, but just know that that's a prerequisite. But once those apps are loaded and then they're here available, then this is me doing this as an individual user, right? I can go in and select the ones I want to work with. Obviously, we don't want to do that, or we don't want each user to do that on their own. There might be cases where you, of course, allow that, but we have 50 people. We want to do that for them. So there is a process or a method to say, deploy this, by person or by group, let's say, usually by role, what role should get which reports. So there is a mechanism for admins, and you don't need us. I mean, we would love to help you, but this does not require development. It does not require your partner to do this. You can do this on your own if you're the Business Central admin, which is go in and select, from permissions in Power BI and permissions in Business Central, who should have what apps or what groups and what roles should have what apps, and then they will be able to see those on their dashboard. So there's, like I said, it's not really technical. It's more just getting that loaded and going through some security to do some setup to get those in there. And then that makes them available. Let's take a look
Thanks.
at it. Yeah, thank you for the
Steve,
question.
another question came
Yeah,
up.
sure.
Are the Business Central Power BI reports shared somewhere? They only saw the reports created by themselves.
Right. So the reports, so these apps, the app itself creates Power BI reports that live in the Power BI service. They're in Power BI. If you only see your own, that means you don't have permission to the workspace or the part of Power BI that's storing all of these. So it's probably a permission thing. If you only see your own reports that you created. So it has to do with permissions and how they're deployed as to whether you're allowed or you can see the other reports. So I don't have it here for this presentation, but we can certainly do a follow-up. There are a couple of steps of getting permissions to be able to say, well, they're there in Power BI. Why don't I see them? I only see the ones I created. It just means either the app's not loaded or the app doesn't have permission out to your user or to your group to be able to see them. And there's some basic steps there. Again, it's not very technical that you have to do. But but having said that, it is important to know that if you have created your own reports, there is a function, and this was already here, this is not new, but there is a function here to go out and you could grab a Power BI file that you've created. Here would be a PBIX, is just the extension for a Power BI file. This could be a Power BI report that has nothing to do with Business Central, or it might be it could be a totally different system that you're using that you wrote a Power BI report for. And again, assuming you have license and permission, you can load that report and make it visible on your dashboard in Business Central. So you can point at anything you want. The ones that we're seeing inside the system are the ones, of course, that got deployed through the new features with BC and Power BI, but you can always add your own. And you'll see when I was going through this select report, how those would present themselves is in my workspace. This is my personal, like, think of it like your My Documents kind of concept of Power BI. I've got these reports out here, and here's one that's a little different. Like, these are the apps we were talking about. Here's one that's a different demo version, but this could be other standalone Power BI reports, even connecting to other systems that I might have put out there. Let me pick a couple of other ones just to look at. We won't go through all of them, but I just want to give you an idea of what's available out there to give you a flavor, a feel for those. So let's expand on this one. We'll go back to full screen. Okay, so again, we've got, this is live information. I'm going to click on a couple. I'll just kind of click through a few of these. You see here is this daily sales. You see some dates here. These are actual individual invoices going across where they put some margin in. You've got month-to-date activity, sales by salesperson. So you see there's quite a few different views here, sales by item. So these are just good examples of data that's ready. Again, those filters are there. So if you want to filter down to a particular item, particular customer, whatever you want to do, that's all ready for you to go. We'll hit one more and then we'll wrap this topic up. Let me get back to the select screen. And what I'll do this time is actually just mention, I don't think we talked about it on that first page, but just kind of the reminder of, so we had finance, we have sales, which includes receivables, project. There's a project app or a project module in Business Central. It used to be called job. Think of it like a project accounting or a job cost module for people that need that. There's the manufacturing for anyone that's doing production, because BC can do manufacturing and production orders, bombs, etc. And then there's inventory and there's purchase. So let's go into the purchase. Okay, we'll expand this one out again. All right, so you got your overview, of course, and let's see here. We'll go. There's a moving annual total. You see, they try to give you some good ideas about what you want to use. Again, this is all standard Power BI here, so that means to the extent possible, I can drill down, drill up on the data, depending on what data I have. It'll expand this out, focus or not focus, or export these to export the data. Anything you could do normally in a Power BI report, you can do here in the embedded mode. So you haven't lost any of that. It's really all the same thing that you can do. So you can go through those. Okay, so let me get out of this. So the last part I want to mention on this is you can also do this with, you can embed these into Teams. And I am going to, should have had this up already. Let's get over to Teams. Where's my Teams? Let me open up Teams for this demo environment. Hopefully this won't open my Teams, but it should open the demo Teams. So they have built in several examples of data that can be visible in Teams that's from Business Central. And so I'm going to show a couple of examples of that. And Power BI is one of those. Again, keeping in mind, all of this has to be with security. So you can only see what you're allowed to see. You have to be a BC user. All of that still comes into play. So it's not like you can do something just because you're in Teams that you wouldn't normally be able to do. So I'm in a kind of a general channel here. I'm in a team channel here. I'm going to go into the finance app. This is what we're going to see is what we saw earlier. So I just want to just show this example of this could be very handy for, depending on your scenario, if you don't want to be in Business Central or you want to expand out this data in Power BI, and that's what I see. I'm like a read-only version of that. Give this a second and close it out. So it's real small here, but you could still do the punch out. So that the concept, of course, is that same data is here in Teams and it's coming through Power BI, coming from Business Central, all that same data. So that's really handy. They've added that. All those apps can be added in here. No programming. You can go out. There's a wizard for adding and connecting that to Teams. The other one, this is not Power BI, but I wanted to show this while we're here, is there's another connector that lets you connect various pages, almost any page if you set up the link. But this is a link of my vendor list in Teams, again, keeping security in mind and all of that. But I'm inside Business Central and I can do things in here. I've got new buttons. I mean, I can process and do things in here. I'm not saying that everyone would do that, but sometimes it's a matter of convenience, or at the time I'm in Teams and I want to process this through. It's an embedded window for Business Central that's in Teams. So that's kind of all working together. The Power BI works here. Teams can work in, Teams can see Business Central in general if you want that to happen. So it's kind of a nice way to put all that together. All right, so that's what I had. Let's go back to the top here. Any other questions, issues that we want to discuss?
Yeah, we have a few more questions,
Okay.
Steve. Are these Power BI apps or BC apps?
These are Power BI apps made for BC in the sense that they are connecting both together. So I don't know if that answers the question exactly. I know, and I'm not as technical to know how they built it, but I know when I went out and searched for them, it opened them up and it basically asked me if I wanted to connect these Power BI reports to Business Central. So there is a connector that's happening, but the root of them is Power BI.
All right. Another question, can the embedded window pull up the approval request entries?
For Teams, I don't know that. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I will check. I will say that there is a similar embedded window that works in Outlook. And so if you have Business Central with with the Business Central connector, let's say for Outlook, you can do workflow approval in Outlook connecting to Business Central. I will check on the Teams to see if that's one of the options for workflow there. But I will say it does work in the Outlook, and it will work on your phone too. There's a phone app for Business Central. It's a true app. It's not just seeing the browser page. It's a true app, and you can see your Power BI, and you can see your approvals on the app too.
Super, thank you. There was also a follow-up question related earlier on the Business Central Power BI reports, asking if they are shared somewhere because they only saw reports created by themselves. A follow-up was that they could only see their own workspaces, but not Business Central's. They were wondering if that was related to licensing.
It could be. They won't show themselves as being Business Central per se. There'll be a kind of a company level, organization level workspace that does get put into, and then you'll have your own personal workspace in Power BI. They should be visible in I guess it really is Business Central. I don't think it's labeled as Business Central workspace, but it's probably a permission thing as far as not seeing those, because it just creates, a normal, well, I'd say normal, I guess normal is the right word. They're normal Power BI reports or apps that are in a workspace that's for the company. So it sounds like permissions, but you can see all of this. You can run those reports inside Power BI. You can go to Power BI directly on your browser or through your Power BI desktop if you have it, and see those. You don't have to go through Business Central to see those reports. So they're there somewhere. It's probably permissions that we're not seeing them.
Okay. We don't see any other questions at this time. If anyone does have questions, feel free to reach out. We're happy to help address. And one question did come in. What is the difference between Power BI Pro and Premium?
So we'll have to do a follow-up on that. I'm not a Power BI expert, so I don't know. I know obviously premium means more. I don't know that answer. We'll have to do a follow-up on that. That's a good question, though.
Great. Yes, Jim, we'll follow up with you on that to get an answer. Another question, once you install the apps from above the link, it shows up in Business Central.
So I'm not sure if that's the question, but once you install the apps and for yourself, if you have permission, they will show up in the list, the select list. So once the apps in there for Power BI, then they will then show up in this select report list. That assumes that, if you're the one setting up, for example, you'll see them. Other people won't see them until you give them permission. But once you've loaded those into Power BI, you will see them here. You don't have to do anything. And there is a couple of other little setup things. Again, it's not technical or development, but there's a couple of setup items that we do in BC for this. But effectively, once they're in Power BI, they're in this list. And then it's a matter of which ones do I turn on or off. They'll be in the list, but I'm unchecking them now, right? So this means they're not going to be visible to me. It's not deleting them from anything. It's just a visibility to myself.
Perfect. Thank you for covering that. The question of will the recording be shared after this webinar? Yes, we'll share out the recording and the presentation deck for reference. Another question as well, are there any issues with Business Central performance with Copilot?
I have not seen it impact Business Central directly, but as we know, sometimes Copilot isn't that fast, right? So if we were analyzing a lot of data, it does do a lot of crunching, and that part of what I've been learning so far and been told, the better you can refine your prompts or your queries when you're asking it, there are ways to make that go faster. But it's a good question as far as It could take a while to crunch. Again, it's not so much, it's not, this is what I've been told. It's not impacting other users' performance of how is BC running. It would impact this possibly, okay, how long is it taking you to get the data through Copilot? So I haven't heard that. We're kind of keeping an eye on that to see, because again, we know sometimes when you ask Copilot questions, it does a lot of thinking and a lot of searching, but I haven't heard that it's slowing down other users. That is something that we're obviously keeping an eye on.
Great. Okay, it looks like those are all of the questions at this point. Again, any other questions that come up, we are more than happy to help in following up. And our teams are staying in close with Microsoft and all of the enhancements being poured into this, and just want to be a great resource helping customers leverage Business Central with Copilot and all of the new reports available. So hope this was helpful, and we'll follow up with addressing open questions and are here for any future assistance. Appreciate everyone's time today.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.